17 years ago, on the 12th of April 2007, you were the managing director of the Post Office, weren't you?
I was.
And you probably have no idea what you were doing that day, I suppose.
No, I'm sure not.
But Mrs. Janet Skinner, who sits to my right, whom you can see here, knows exactly what was happening to her that day, because on the 12th of April 2007, she was being released from prison, having served a 9-month sentence for false accounting. She'd been jailed on the lie, Mr. Cook, that Horizon was infallible. But you say you had no idea that these prosecutions were being instituted in your name. Is that right?
No, well, I knew there were prosecutions.
She pleaded guilty to false accounting only because she'd been told that if she did not, the Post Office would prosecute and pursue her for theft. She hadn't stolen a penny, Mr. Cook. All of this was being done in your name, and yet you claim you didn't know.
I just can't be more apologetic.
Mrs. Skinner was the mother of 2 young children, wrongly accused of theft. She was told that if she pleaded to false accounting as an alternative to that baseless theft charge, she wouldn't go to prison. Now, this was common practice by the Post Office: charge theft and accept a plea to false accounting. Were you aware of that stratagem, Mr. Cook?
No, in fact, worse than that, when I had reports about them and the individual had pleaded guilty, then I thought we must have been in the right. I did not appreciate what was going on.
So this stratagem was reinforcing your ignorance and the general prejudice that these sub-postmasters had their hand in the till. Is that right?
In the particular cases where the individual pleaded guilty, I had assumed that they believed they were guilty. It didn't occur to me at the time that was recommended to them by their lawyers. If you want.
It was the most profound structural injustice.
Yeah, I agree.
An unmeritorious charge of theft was being used as a jemmy or sledgehammer to force a plea or to crush sub-postmasters into submission.
I don't know if that was a deliberate strategy by the Post Office, but that's how it manifested itself, and it's unacceptable.
It was a strategy, and you ought to have been aware of that strategy. Do you accept that now? Not with hindsight, but what you ought to have known at the time.
I did not know that at the time.
But you ought to have known it at the time, Mr. Cook. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do accept I ought to have known it. I didn't know it. It would be nothing that I would ever willingly want to do.
Yes. Now, of course, it didn't do Mrs. Skinner any good because she was sent to custody all the same, 9 months imprisonment. But before she was imprisoned, like so many sub-postmasters, she'd suffered fictional Horizon shortfalls and had made 116 calls to the National Business Support Centre helpline complaining about balancing faults in the 18 months before she was dismissed. Wrongly dismissed, Mr. Cook, because your auditors thought she'd had her hand in the till. Are you proud of presiding over that culture?
Definitely not, no.
Do you accept that the ultimate responsibility for her torment lay with you as managing director of the Post Office?
It did. I was the managing director, so I was ultimately accountable. Whether I was aware is another matter, and if I wasn't aware, I should have been aware.
Right. But as you have claimed, you maintain that you had no idea that these prosecutions were actually being instituted in your name.
Well, nearly correct. What I was saying was that I had no idea that the Post, up until the Computer Weekly article, that the Post Office could initiate those without having to seek approval from any other party or body. So there was no moderating influence. That is what I was not aware of.
Now, those prosecutions, the Court of Appeal Criminal Division stated, should never have been brought because they were an affront to the conscience of the court. What do you have to say for yourself about that, sir?
Well, all I can do is repeat what I said at the beginning, is I just apologise unreservedly. I'm not the sort of guy that is malicious or would want to do harm to anyone, but it was, and I was not aware, but that is not an excuse, it's an explanation. There's no excuse for the fact that this happened, and it was on my watch. And, you know, this is what this inquiry is about, is to establish how that could have happened. And I've tried my honest best to portray exactly what I recall happening many, many years ago, but it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable.
Finally, do you have anything by way of a personal direct apology that you would like to say to Mrs. Skinner?
I would love to talk to her afterwards, but you may not want to. But I can only apologise on behalf of the whole organisation for the way that you were treated. It was disgraceful. I can only apologise personally that whilst I had not heard of your case, I'm nevertheless, I have an accountability that I should have been on top of it, and I wasn't.